Hey everyone, welcome back to another video on Red Dead Redemption 2. Today we're going to talk about the cut content that were removed from the games before release. And trust me, it's very interesting. Like the feature that would have allowed to change gang loadout. As you know, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game that focuses on the story of Arthur Morgan and his gang of outlaws. Throughout the game, you go on various missions with different members of your gang, such as Dutch, John, Sadie, Charles, and more. However, did you know that you could have had more control over who you take with you and what weapons they use? According to the cut files, there was a feature that would let you select your squad or gang loadout before starting a mission. You could choose up to 3 gang members to accompany you and assign them different weapons and outfits. For example, you could have John with a shotgun, Sadie with a rifle, and Charles with a bow. You could also change their clothes to suit the environment or the occasion. This feature would have added more customization and strategy to the game, as you could tailor your squad to your preferred playstyle and the mission objectives. So, why was this feature cut from the game? Well, there are a few possible reasons. One is that it would have been too complicated or time-consuming to implement, especially considering the amount of dialogue and interactions that the gang members have with each other and with Arthur. Another reason is that it would have interfered with the narrative and the character development of the game, as the game wants you to experience the story with specific gang members at specific times. For example, some missions are meant to show the bond between Arthur and John, or the rivalry between Arthur and Micah. Having the option to choose your squad would have diluted these moments and made them less impactful. Of course, these are just speculations, and we don't know for sure why Rockstar decided to cut this feature. Maybe they planned to add it later as a DLC or an update, but never got around to it. But it surely would have been cool. Some bounty missions were also removed. According to the game files, there were several bounty targets that were planned to be in the game, but never made it to the final version. Some of them had models, textures, and even dialogue, but were never implemented in the game. Let's take a look at some of these cut bounty missions and see what they were about. One of the cut bounty targets was James Jim McGoggerty, a mauled outlaw who was supposed to be found at the saloon in St. Denis. He had a scarred face and a missing eye, presumably from a bear attack. He also had a counterpart, a mauled O'Driscoll, who may have served as an alternative target. It is unclear why these bounty missions were cut, but maybe they were too gruesome or too similar to other bounty missions in the game. Another cut bounty target was an old man who was labeled as Forgiven. He had a long beard and a hat, and he looked like a typical prospector. He may have been involved in some crime in the past, but was pardoned by the law. Perhaps he was cut because he was too sympathetic or too boring as a bounty target. A third cut bounty target was a character named Abe McLean, who was the owner of McLean's house, a location in the game. He had a few cut missions featuring him and his mail-order bride, who may have been kidnapped or killed by some enemies. He also had a different appearance in the game files, with a different suit and pants. Maybe he was cut because his missions were too complex or too irrelevant to the main story. There are many more cut bounty targets in the game files, such as a Rhodes Saloon bouncer, a Cajun, a Braithwaite servant, and a character named Featherston Chambers, who may have been related to Dutch van der Linde. So, why were these bounty missions cut from the game? Well, we don't know for sure, but we can speculate. Maybe they were cut due to time constraints, technical issues, or creative decisions. Maybe they were cut because they didn't fit the tone, the theme, or the story of the game. Maybe they were cut because they were too similar, too easy, or too hard. Or maybe they were cut because they were just not good enough. Whatever the reason, it is a shame that we never got to see these bounty missions in the game. They could have added more variety, more challenge, and more fun to the game. They could have also revealed more about the world, the characters, and the lore of the game. But, alas, they are gone forever, and we can only imagine what they would have been like. Another feature that would have allowed you to create your own gang using NPCs. That's right, you could have recruited and commanded your own outlaws in the Wild West. Sounds awesome, right? According to some sources, the original concept of the game was supposed to span from 1877 to 1899, and then have 2 different epilogues based on your honor level. You could play as either John Marston or Dutch van der Linde after the gang broke up. The idea was that you could continue the outlaw lifestyle with your own gang of NPCs, who would follow you around and help you in missions and combat. You could only control the 3 protagonists, though, which were Hosea, Dutch, and Arthur in the main story, and John, Sadie, and Charles, or Javier, Bill, and Dutch in the epilogues. You could also interact with your gang members and give them orders, such as robbing, hunting, or camping. This feature was probably removed for several reasons. One is that it would have been very complex and difficult to implement, especially with the dynamic and realistic AI of the game. Another is that it would have conflicted with the narrative and thematic focus of the game, which is about the decline and dissolution of the Van der Linde gang and the end of the outlaw era. Having your own gang would have undermined the emotional impact of losing your friends and family, and the sense of isolation and desperation that the characters face. It would have also made the game less immersive and more gamey, as you could have potentially exploited the system and created a large and powerful gang that could dominate the world. So as much as we would have loved to create our own gang in Red Dead Redemption 2, we can understand why this feature was cut from the game. It would have been too ambitious and incompatible with the vision and tone of the game. Let me now tell you about one feature from original Red Dead Redemption that was removed: removing bat hunting mechanics. Bats are small flying mammals that are mostly active at night. They can be found in caves, mines, and other dark places. In Red Dead Redemption 1, bats were meant to be one of the many animals that the player could hunt and skin for their pelts and meat. Bat wings were supposed to be a provision that the player could use or sell. However, for some reason, this feature was removed from the game before release. Bats still appear in the game as ambient creatures, but they cannot be interacted with or harmed by the player. They also appear in the Undead Nightmare DLC, where they are infected by the zombie plague and attack the player. So why was this feature cut from the game? Well, there are a few possible explanations. One is that bats were too small and fast to be a satisfying hunting target. It would be difficult to aim and shoot at them, especially with the game's realistic bullet physics. Another is that bats were not very valuable or useful as a resource. Bat wings would not provide much benefit to the player, and they would not fit the game's Western theme. A third is that bats were removed simply to be re-added in the Undead Nightmare DLC, as they were more fitting to the theme of the game. Whatever the reason, it's interesting to think about what the game would have been like if this feature was included. Maybe we would have seen some unique challenges or achievements related to bats. Maybe we would have discovered some secrets or Easter eggs in the caves where they live. Maybe we would have encountered some legendary bats that would give us special rewards. Back to Red Dead Redemption 2. Arthur's second love interest. As you may know, Arthur Morgan is the main protagonist of Red Dead Redemption 2, and he has a complicated relationship with his former lover, Mary Linton. Throughout the game, Arthur and Mary have several encounters, and Arthur can choose to help her or reject her. However, did you know that Arthur was originally supposed to have another love interest besides Mary? According to Dan Houser, the co-founder of Rockstar Games and the writer of Red Dead Redemption 2, the game's story mode was initially 65 hours long, but 5 hours of it were cut before the release. One of the reasons for the cut was that Arthur had 2 love interests, but they decided that one of them didn't work. So who was this mysterious second love interest, and why did they remove her from the game? Well, there are a few theories and clues that might give us some answers. Let's take a look at them. The first and most popular theory is that the second love interest was Sadie Adler, the widow of Jake Adler and a member of the Van der Linde gang. Sadie and Arthur have a close friendship throughout the game, and they often work together on missions and bounties. Sadie is also one of the few characters who supports Arthur when he reveals his tuberculosis diagnosis, and she helps him escape from the Pinkertons in the end. Some fans speculate that Sadie and Arthur were meant to have a romantic relationship, but it was cut because it didn't fit with their characters or the story. Sadie is still grieving over her husband's death, and she becomes a ruthless and independent bounty hunter who doesn't need anyone. Arthur is also loyal to Mary, and he respects Sadie as a friend and a partner. Their relationship is more like a brother and sister bond rather than a romantic one. Another reason why Sadie might not have been the second love interest is that she is introduced very late in the game, in Chapter 1. It would be hard to develop a meaningful romance with her in such a short time, especially when Arthur is already involved with Mary and has other things to worry about, like the gang's survival and his own health. The second theory is that the second love interest was Charlotte Balfour, the widow of Cal Balfour, and a homesteader in Roanoke Ridge. Arthur meets Charlotte in Chapter 6, when he helps her bury her husband and teaches her how to hunt and survive in the wilderness. Charlotte is grateful for Arthur's kindness, and she invites him to stay for dinner and rest at her cabin. She also kisses him on the cheek when they part ways, and she tells him to come back anytime. Some fans think that Charlotte and Arthur had a potential romance, but it was cut because it was too late in the game and too tragic for Arthur. Charlotte is a sweet and innocent woman who has lost everything, and Arthur is a dying outlaw who has nothing to offer her. Their romance would be doomed from the start, and it would only add more pain and sorrow to Arthur's life. Another reason why Charlotte might not have been the second love interest is that she is optional and missable in the game. Arthur can choose to ignore her or kill her, and he can also skip her missions entirely. It would be strange to have a major love interest who is not mandatory or relevant to the main story. The third and final theory is that the second love interest was a completely different character who was cut from the game along with her missions. This theory is based on the fact that Dan Houser mentioned that they removed a mission on a train where Arthur had to deal with bounty hunters, and he implied that it was related to the second love interest. He also said that the second love interest was superfluous and not technical, which means that she was not essential or realistic for the game. This suggests that this character might have been a new or existing character who was involved in Arthur's past or present. For example, it could have been a former lover or a rival gang member who had a history with Arthur. It could also have been a random stranger or a side character who had a connection with Arthur. However, there is no concrete evidence or information about this character, so it is all speculation and imagination. So, what do you think? Who was Arthur Morgan's second love interest, and why did they cut her from the game? Do you agree with Rockstar's decision, or do you wish they kept her in the game? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Rockstar also changed Arthur's son backstory. In an optional conversation with Rains Fall, Arthur will bring up his son, Isaac. A son born to a waitress, Arthur visited him off and on for 10 years until one day, he arrived to find 2 graves outside the house. The 2 lost their lives in a robbery over $10, adding yet another layer of tragedy to Arthur's life. This is the only time Arthur mentions his son in the game, but according to some theories and evidence from the game files, there was supposed to be more to his son's backstory. It could be that Arthur's second love interest in the game was going to be Eliza, the mother of his son. There are also hints that Arthur's son was going to appear in some flashbacks, where we would see Arthur bonding with him and doing various illegal activities to support his family. One of these activities could have been the cut robbery mission that Dan Houser, the co-founder of Rockstar Games, mentioned in an interview. Next, Neanderthal NPC. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game full of mysteries, Easter eggs, and hidden details, but none of them are as baffling as the discovery of a Neanderthal-like character in the game files. This NPC has a facial structure that is very different from modern humans, and wears a primitive outfit that suggests a prehistoric origin. But what is this NPC doing in the game, and why was it never encountered in the game world? The Neanderthal NPC was first discovered by hackers and modders who explored the game's files and the areas outside the game's boundaries. They found a fully rendered character model and a unique animation for the NPC, but no other clues about its purpose or location. Some speculated that the NPC was part of cut content and that it was supposed to appear somewhere in the game, perhaps as an Easter egg or a secret encounter. Others suggested that the NPC was an intentional prank by the developers, who wanted to mess with the players who would dig into the game's files. One of the most popular theories about the Neanderthal NPC is that it was meant to be found frozen in a block of ice somewhere in the game world, possibly in the Grizzlies or the Wapiti Reservation. This theory is based on the fact that the NPC's animation shows it struggling to break free from something, and that its model has a blue tint that resembles ice. Some players have even tried to find the NPC's location by using cheats or glitches, but so far, no one has been able to find it. Another theory is that the Neanderthal NPC was related to a cut mission or a cut stranger event, where the player would encounter the NPC and learn more about its backstory. Perhaps the NPC was a survivor of an ancient civilization that lived in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans, or maybe it was a result of some experiment or mutation. Maybe the NPC had some connection to the other mysteries in the game, such as the UFOs, the meteorites, or the cave paintings. Unfortunately, there is no evidence to support any of these theories, and the NPC remains a mystery. Now let's talk Guarma. Guarma is a tropical island that serves as the setting for Chapter 5 of the game, where Arthur and some of his gang members are shipwrecked after fleeing from the Pinkertons. The island is ruled by a ruthless dictator named Colonel Fusar, who oppresses the local rebels and forces them to work in his sugar plantations. Arthur and his friends have to survive the harsh environment, fight off Fusar's soldiers, and find a way to escape the island and return to America. However, Guarma was not always meant to be such a linear and scripted experience. In fact, there is a lot of evidence that suggests that Guarma was originally planned to be a much larger and more open-world area, with more missions, characters, and activities to explore. Let's take a look at some of the cut content of Guarma and try to figure out why it was removed from the final game. One of the most obvious signs of Guarma's cut content is the sheer size and detail of the island. If you use a glitch or a mod to explore the island beyond the boundaries of Chapter 5, you will discover a vast and diverse landscape with different biomes, wildlife, and landmarks. You can find jungles, beaches, mountains, caves, waterfalls, villages, forts, and even a volcano. The island is also populated by various animals, some of which are unique to Guarma, such as parrots, macaws, snakes, boars, and even sharks. The island also has a day and night cycle, weather effects, and ambient sounds, making it feel like a living and breathing world. However, most of this content is inaccessible and unused in the final game, as the player is restricted to a small and linear path that leads them from one mission to another. The only time the player can freely explore the island is during a brief segment where they have to hunt for food, but even then, they are limited by a wanted level and a sniper that will kill them if they stray too far. It seems that Rockstar put a lot of effort and resources into creating Guarma, only to hide it behind invisible walls and scripted events. But Rockstar removed it. Guarma is a separate map from the main game, and loading it requires a long and unskippable cutscene. Perhaps Rockstar wanted to avoid having too many loading screens and transitions between the two maps, and decided to make Guarma a shorter and more focused chapter. Another reason could be narrative and pacing issues. Guarma is a major detour from the main story, and some players might have felt disconnected and bored by spending too much time on the island. Perhaps Rockstar wanted to keep the story moving and get the player back to the main conflict as soon as possible. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And don't forget to check out my other videos on Red Dead Redemption 2. I'll see you next time. Till then, take care.